The Addiction Podcast, Point of No Return.
Hello, I'm Joni Siegel, the host of the Addiction Podcast. In 2022, over 100,000 people died from drug and alcohol abuse, and that number is growing daily. Fentanyl poisoning, pot, cocaine, heroin, and even psychedelics and alcohol all contribute to this crisis, while we're bombarded with promotions from thousands of rehabs. Newborns are born addicted, and the majority of homeless people struggle with drug addiction. Drug dealers exploit online resources to sell to teens, and antidepressant use is spiraling out of control. This podcast features brutally honest guest interviews revealing harsh realities and offering hope and solutions through their stories. We don't sugarcoat anything. Guests speak raw and real. More importantly, you'll find inspiration to understand, overcome, and achieve recovery, whether for yourself or to help others, some within your own family, many among your friends or associates. Whether you're seeking help or just a glimmer of hope, our podcast equips you with the latest insights to confront this generational battle. Many listeners tell us they want to join the fight, but do not have the time or money to act, lobby, or just help. If that's you, go to www.patreon.com/theaddictionpodcast and see how you can help. Barbie Rivera, thank you for being with us today on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Nice to see you again.
Good to see you again.
Thank you. So, Barbie, what's the most shocking thing you learned in your research? I am going to ask you to tell us about your book, but that'll be a little bit further down. But what's the most shocking thing you've learned? You've been looking into education, the state of education, and the impact of drugs on our kids. So what's the most shocking thing you've learned? Is drug addiction tearing your family apart? Don't let it consume another moment of your life. Take action now with addicted.org. Their experienced team is solely dedicated to helping families and individuals affected by drug addiction across the United States find the right rehab center quickly and tailored to specific individual needs. When you dial 1-877-919-8126, you're connecting with a dedicated rehab specialist who knows the ins and outs of addiction recovery and cares about you. Don't hesitate. Don't wait for another day to slip away. Call us now at 1-877-919-8126 or visit addicted.org. Let their family help yours on your journey to recovery.
There's many shocking things, to be honest, but I think the most is that we put children on psychotropic medications and think that that's going to make them smarter somehow, more intelligent, more alert, better able to solve the problems of living. And it just doesn't. It does the exact reverse. So to me, that's shocking because I don't know when that became a thing, but it doesn't make sense. Like, it doesn't make sense on any level. So that's one I can't get past.
I would say that is sufficiently shocking.
Yes.
I will tell you that I went, I'm going to give just a little side note here. I went to a networking event this morning. I've been doing a lot of networking for this podcast and for our marketing business. And I was talking about you being on the podcast today. And I was telling a little bit of your story. And this young mother said, they wanted to put my daughter on medicine. They said she had ADHD and they wanted me to put her on medicine. She said, but I observed my sister-in-law whose child had been diagnosed or been told that he had ADHD. And she said it just turned him into a zombie. And she said, I refuse to do it. I cannot believe that there is not another solution. Now, this is a mom who doesn't necessarily have the education that you and I do in terms of the effects of these drugs. But I was so thankful to her for not putting her child on drugs, and moms know I think sometimes they don't have a solution, so they get frustrated and they don't exactly know what to do. But I think more and more today, they are learning that there are other solutions.
Yes. But what you say is key. I mean, we still have a society that looks to the experts, and the experts should know what they're doing. And I'm not bashing everybody, but I'll tell you, since the pandemic, the number of kids coming in to see me in my school for either tutoring, or I want to put them in your second grade or third grade, or can't read in sixth grade, like horrible stories. The number of kids on multiple medications has skyrocketed. Like I've met a 5-year-old who was placed on Prozac at age 3. And I'm like, what are we doing to this 5-year-old? And just to give full scope, I mean, my name is Barbie. So pretty much my little girls that come in I'm like, I'm your principal and my name is Barbie. Instant impact.
Yeah.
And I have a Barbie doll in my office and I have all these little fun things. And usually kids and adults, they come in and they want to start touching things. And that's why it's there, is so that you can look and you can feel the little skunk or the bear. And I'm an artist, so I make all that stuff. This girl, 5 years old, came in, didn't even register. Like, she didn't even look. She was like this. And it was twin girls. And the twin that hadn't been medicated was like asking questions. Can I touch that? Can I have this? And I asked the mother, I'm like, what medication is this one on? She goes, how can you tell? I'm like, how can you not?
How can you not?
How can you not?
Sometimes the hardest thing about getting someone into recovery is getting them to agree to treatment. Bobby Newman, a certified drug counselor with 30 years experience and an over 85% success rate as an interventionist, has created a series of 12 videos that you can use right now to learn every step to get your loved one to agree to treatment. Call 866-989-4499 today and say the word podcast to get a 10% discount. Or go to newmaninterventions.com and type in the word podcast for a 10% discount. This service comes with a free 1-hour consultation with Bobby. Many listeners tell us they want to join the fight, but do not have the time or money to act, lobby, or just help. If that's you, go to www.patreon.com/theaddictionpodcast and see how you can help.
We have a 7-year-old that came in this year on 3 psychotropic medications, one for ADHD, and then when the child got withdrawn, now on an antidepressant. When the child can't sleep, now on another sleep aid. And I'm like, we're poisoning this baby because a 7-year-old, I'd never tell this to a 7-year-old out of respect to a 7-year-old, but a 7-year-old's a baby.
Yeah.
They're a baby. They're into the Tooth Fairy and Santa Claus and all of these things, which they should be.
Yep.
And yet, here's the school poisoning her every single day and thinking that's progress. I'm like, that's a crime. That's me speaking.
I completely agree with you. Years ago, Barbie, I think I mentioned this when I interviewed you before. I happened to make the mistake of looking online. I don't even remember what I was looking about, but I knew, the adverse effects of things like Ritalin on kids. And I happened to look, and I just randomly found a mother whose teenager was on 6 medications. And
Awful.
It upset me so badly. I can't look at that sort of thing on the internet anymore. I'm emotional right now. I cannot believe a 7-year-old on 3 different drugs. I mean, I'm sorry, if any of my listeners are doing that, you need to get help, and you need to get it right now. You can call Barbie. You can call me. I'll figure out a way to help you, but that is just wrong. It's wrong. You know, all over the news today, Barbie, and all over the podcast is the poisoning of our kids with fentanyl. And yes, it's killing them. And yes, that's much more sensational. But this is killing them in the long run because a lot of these kids, they end up with a drug dependency. And maybe we don't call it addiction when they're 7, but when they are dependent on drugs, it moves right into addiction in their later years.
That's right. Well, I have 2 things that I've noticed. Again, this is my viewpoint. It might upset people. 1, the longer the child's on the ADHD medication, the harder it is to educate them. Because I can teach somebody, like middle school is where I live. I love middle school. Kids come in, they don't understand fractions. 1 for 1. Parents don't understand fraction. First question, what does the word fraction mean? 32 years, no one's been able to tell me. That's the entrance point. And in 10 hours, I can have a child who has not been drugged know fractions so well for the rest of their lives, right? Now, again, this is a child without special needs. So clarify.
Yep.
So there's that. The next thing is the longer these, you know, when you give drugs and the medications for ADHD fit under what's called CNS medication, which is central nervous system. They are designed to shut down the central nervous system because now in school, we want to pack the class, but man, that kid can't move. He cannot move. So we shut his central nervous system down. And I have parents that'll come, oh, but I don't give them the drugs in the summertime or on the weekend. And I'm like, what do you think happens when you give a psychotropic medication to a physical body that weighs 40, 50, 60 pounds, whose baby teeth haven't formed? Like, come on, people treat their pets better. And again, I understand because I was in the situation where I was told to drug my son. So anyway, I get it.
But tell us that story, because that's how you got started on all of this in terms of being an educator. Tell us how you got started.
Well, I want to just bring up one point. So, okay, so my children, this is kind of funny. I'm Midwest American. One of my Cuban friends describes me as milk white with a touch of albino, right? I'm like, I'm not offended at all. And I'm not. And my children are all Latin, right? So their grandmother, I'm in Miami. Yeah. Their grandmother cooks, and I don't know, you could have hot dogs and cornflakes, and she's going to turn it into something incredible. Me, I have to have a cookbook, right? And even my kids cracked up one day. They saw me coming home from Barnes and Noble. They're like, what's that? And it's like how to cook Cuban food. They're like, Mom, you can't learn that. And I followed the recipe exactly, right? And it didn't come out right. It didn't come out like grandma's. Who would say that a drug is going to help me get there?
You are listening to the Addiction Podcast, Point of No Return. For more information on the podcast or to reach out if you have a story you would like to share with us, go to our Facebook page by the same name, or you can email us at theaddictionpodcast@yahoo.com or go to our website, theaddictionpodcast.com. And please remember to subscribe to our podcast wherever you listen to podcasts and give us a 5-star review.
I'm like, what? No one is going to prescribe a drug to me, but yet
that's what we do with kids.
5 years old. Yes, totally fine. This is how we do it in America. And the United States is #1 country in the world for the drugging of children. For ADHD. And you're like, look at all these billions of dollars being poured into the school system. They're being, and all the money that the schools make. Anyway, so my story is, my gosh, my son's going to be 40 this summer.
Oh my God.
I know. I can't stand it. Anyway, when he was 6, he goes to school and he has the the sharp haircut. He's got the light up sneakers. He's got the lunchbox. And I'm like, and he's bilingual. He's very well behaved, like very easygoing child. Across the board, never threw a fit at the grocery store. He was not a brat in any sense of the word. One of my other ones was, but he was not. So I'm like, the teacher is going to love him. He's so pleasant and so eager to learn. 10 days, Joni. The teacher, I need to have a meeting with you. I'm like, okay. And I go in. Your son is mentally handicapped and will need prescription. We want to evaluate, label, and he will most likely need a prescription the rest of his life to learn. And I'm like, what are we even saying? I go, clearly, and I let her talk because everything she's saying is giving me more ammunition for what I'm going to say back. I'm like, if he can't learn, how did he dress himself for school? If he can't learn, how does he know a whole other language that I don't know? I don't speak 2 languages, yet my son is fluent. So how did that happen? And what pill? And it was because he wasn't reading. But when I look at the reading material, and I remember it, like now they give packets. It's not education anymore. It's packets of papers and you have to do this. And they're not even graded. It's a complete fraud. We can save that for later. Yeah. Anyway, he had a packet and the opening, it was reading comprehension. It had a paragraph and then it had questions and answers. And he had to write a sentence. He couldn't read, but yet he had to write a sentence. The opening line was, the curious raccoon scampered up the tree. And I'm like, where is the dog sat on a mat?
Oh, what happened to C-Spot Run?
Exactly. Where's the gap here? So my son couldn't do it. And that was the criteria for labeling him, which he never got labeled. I didn't allow it.
Right.
And there was a lot of pressure though. They're like, he confuses the B and the D. And I'm like, well, that's hilarious because they look alike.
Exactly.
I can understand that.
Yeah.
He does not confuse a cow and a dinosaur.
Right.
Like he knows his differences. You know,
yeah.
He knows his differences. But that's kind of like turquoise and green and blue. Like depending on your eye, it could look more the other way. So, and then I thought I was being funny and I got in trouble for this one. He confuses the 6 and the 9. And my response, which I remember, I was like, I'll take my 6-year-old son off of all financial duties of the family. He will no longer be writing checks and balancing the checkbook until he fixes this 6 and 9 problem.
Oh, I bet that went over like a lead balloon.
Oh, yeah, that was not. I was like, now I'm going to get labeled.
Right.
But it's ridiculous. I'm like, what happened? You know, and again, comparing, full disclosure, I was a teenage mom. So I had Damon probably 5 weeks, 6 weeks after I turned 20.
Okay.
And I did first grade, I think 1970, 1969, 1970. In first grade, in that time period, the teacher had to play the piano. We had a 30-minute recess in the morning before lunch. And it wasn't just wild play. It was controlled play with the teacher. Duck, duck, goose. We're going to sing a song, Twinkle Little Star, whatever it was. It was 30 minutes of that. Then we had lunch, which was 45 minutes. And that was you eat, you have manners, and then you can play however you want to play. And then there was another 30-minute recess after. And the day was an easy day. We didn't get homework. There was no standardized testing. We read these simple books. I don't even think we had spelling as a subject until second grade. Because what's the point?
Right.
Right? We're learning handwriting. We're learning the correct formation of the uppercase and lowercase alphabet. We're learning that sentences end with a period. We're not even getting into question marks and exclamation marks, but it was over and over and over and over and over. And there was a lot of activity. Like we weren't stuck in a chair all day. And my son was being stuck in a chair. And I saw my son lose. I lost my son. And that, I kept him in school, and now I'm going to cry. And this doesn't go away, Joni, what I did, because I made a huge mistake. I knew my son was miserable, and he's not somebody that's like, oh, if you make me eat these peas, I'm going to die. And he throws himself on the floor. Like that's drama.
Yeah.
He wasn't dramatic. I saw his spirit being broken every single day. And he came in with these packets, and I was being the good mom. And I had my toddlers, because I had a 1-year-old or an 11-month-old. My daughter was 3. And I'm pregnant with my 4th, who's due in November. And Damon, I got the bad news on Damon at the beginning of September, that he was mentally handicapped. And I didn't think I could do it. So I'm like, I'm going to work with Damon. And every day that I worked with him, I saw him lose that much more respect from me, because I'm having him do something that he should not be doing. First graders, 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds, 8-year-olds, and 9-year-olds should not be tied to a chair for homework for hours and hours and hours. They should get none. Right? They should get none. And the solution was, we're going to drug them.
Yeah.
And I'm like, tutoring was never, ever, ever brought up. Extra help was never, ever, ever brought up. And how did I handle the B and the D? I got him Play-Doh. How did I handle, and he had to make the lowercase b, when you do it like this, if you add an upper one, it turns into a capital B. You can't do that with a D. And it was Play-Doh. And he was playing. And he learned it because I knew he would.
Right.
He learned eventually how to potty train. He learned eventually how to put the right shoe on the right foot. Like, they don't get it right away.
Right.
And that's the point that I'm like, what is happening here?
Yeah.
And everyone in that school, and I don't know everyone, but everyone I came in contact with, 100% pushing the drugs. Wow. 100%.
And you were smart enough to not do that. But you look at another mother in your situation with 3 kids and another one on the way who doesn't know what else to do.
Right.
And there you go.
And there you go. But I'm going to tell you, that brings us around to the book that I wrote. I would have loved to have had the life that I set out to have. I set out to be an artist. I wanted 8 children. I like a big family. I come from a huge family.
Wow.
My grandmother had 13.
Wow.
And there was like dozens of us. So that was normal to me. But it didn't work out for me. And I ended up putting my art supplies away, and I ended up creating this homeschool situation. And I had friends and family come in, and that's how I made my living. Because shortly after this, a few years later, not so fast, I became a single parent. And I'm like, my only skill right now is that I know how to homeschool. I know how to raise a child. I know how to educate a child. I've seen it, but it took me 2 years to get my son back.
Wow.
2 years. And my other kids.
How long was he in school, Barbie? How long did you leave him in?
A year and a half.
Okay.
He started halfway in kindergarten, which that was a little bit whatever, but I had a teacher that I could talk to and kind of buffered him. But first grade, I'm telling, he was expected to write book reports. And I'll tell you, recently, this is so disgusting. This gorgeous little girl, 5, you would want her as your granddaughter. I would want her as my granddaughter. She comes into school And, we have uniforms, but on Wednesday you can dress how you want. And she's like, I have a unicorn beret. I have a unicorn socks. She's like super creative, and she's got like some fluffy ballet skirt on. This is this girl. She's very creative, very animated. In school, the breaking point for the parents, besides the school pushing for medication because they found her hyperactive, she was overly creative.
How is that even a term?
I'm just saying, because it doesn't fit within the reality. Like, won't sit in a chair, blurts out, it's like, I want to be a butterfly. That's called not reality. Anyway, her assignment this was the assignment that pushed the parents over the edge. 5 years old. She had to do a presentation on the presentation boards that you can buy at Office Depot or Staples, that are big cardboard things, on the Gerald Ford presidency and how he became president and why was it he wasn't voted in. He took over because the President Nixon was impeached. 5 years old. 5 years old. And this little girl just wanted to play.
Wow.
And she was willing to do work.
Yeah.
But not
not
that.
something not something she doesn't even understand.
Ridiculous. Like, that is insanity.
Yeah.
And then I'm gonna see if I can find it very quickly anyway, this led me to write a book.
Yeah. I have a granddaughter who'll be 3 years old in July. I'm still stuck on the 3-year-old that was put on drugs. If anybody ever even tried to put her on drugs, I'd probably be in jail.
End up in jail.
Yeah,
Yep,
I would. Yeah.
Exactly. So I'm going to see if I can get this. This is from my book. It's on page 63.
Okay.
So you see that picture? Does that show? Okay. So that is Octopus Man versus Spider-Man. This picture was drawn by a 5-year-old boy. And it was that picture that got him medicated. And I have the paperwork. I have the psychiatric report from the school. The teacher found his drawings immature in nature. And it just went all down the line. Now, he was being raised by his grandmother, and nowhere in the paperwork does it say how old the grandmother was or what's the circumstance. Like, because there has to be some reason for a grandparent to be legally adopted the child. And is this grandmother 89 or is she 49? It makes a difference with the 5-year-old boy. And this kid was on drugs, multiple drugs, until he came to my summer program when he was 17 years old. And he goes, well, I need to be drugged to learn. And I'm like, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. I go, we're going to use a dictionary and you're going to learn definitions of words and we're going to pull this apart, because when you learn math here, when you graduate Algebra 2, you should be able to tutor it. That's how well you should know it. And it just switched. It just switched him. And the grandmother got the pediatrician or whatever to take him off the medications. But whatever damage has been done, and the kid was a great kid.
And that one little comment you make there, the damage has been done. I think sometimes people don't understand the long-term physical, mental, spiritual damage that these drugs do. You know, someone who's been a heroin addict for 20 years, they have physical and mental damage from doing heroin. These kids end up with physical, mental, and spiritual damage that is not, I mean, I think it may be irreparable. I don't know, but it could be irreparable at that point.
I've personally not seen it repaired.
Yeah.
I've seen a child open up. I've seen a child totally change, but there's still some degree of a fog there. I'm talking when they've been on for years and years and years.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I have another story that I talk about in the book was my 2 youngest boys were born one right after the other. and they were on a picnic, and they were, I don't know, 13, 14, 12, 11, 13. They're in that age group. And they're at the beach. They're in the Keys, and there's a boat dock. Anyway, there's plenty of things for a boy to do. There's tons of food. It's a barbecue, lots of adults, blah, blah, blah. And they are climbing trees, and they are catching iguanas, and they are diving in the ocean, and they are fishing, and they're getting sunburned, and they're eating like nonstop. And their grandmother is like, oh, the boys, like thrilled, right? There was a boy there that was their age who sat in the shade, and he looked at the table the whole day. And my boys tried to get him engaged. They're like, come. And he wouldn't go. And it was the parents were, this boy was put on ADHD medication when he was 6. When the parents came from a Latin American country, they didn't speak English. Their son didn't speak English. He's put in an American public school. He's tested in English. Oh, he can't learn. So he was drugged from 5, and this is now, he's 14, 9 years. And he was a zombie, a complete zombie. And it wasn't until the parents saw their son compared to my boys, who were bottomless pits running all over the place, inventing things with Legos to catch shrimp, kids, boys.
Yeah.
That they were like, they came to see me, and they're like, please, please help me. And I'm like, I will help you. And I remember I gave, I'm a school. So school, there's standardized testing, there's these things, which in many ways, homeschooling, I'll just say it, homeschooling is the way to go. It's so much better even than a school, because you lose that personal touch. However, I have a school. So I gave this boy who should have been 8th grade, I gave him a 4th grade standardized test. And these tests are timed. And you have like 20 minutes for this part of math, and then 20 minutes for the next part, blah, blah, blah. In 20 minutes, he did one problem, which was 54 plus 63. That was how long it took him to process through the fog of drugs the solution to that problem. Wow. And I'm like, and now I know it's going to happen in 2 years. He's going to get a driver's license. And it's no slant to him.
Right.
He is a perfectly good human being, and he was a good boy. Yep. Like he was in my school for years, and this was one that made a turnaround, but he never recovered. Like by the time he was done with me, he got a diploma, and he knew he could learn, and he made great friends, and he had a great relationship with his teacher. But it was like this.
Yeah.
He would post test scores in August and then take the same test in December. Half of it's gone, because depending on the day, depending on whatever, he's there, he's not there, like just present.
Yeah.
He wasn't present, and he knew it.
Yep.
And that's a heartbreaker.
Yeah. And I would just like to say that to take a child who's come from another country, obviously doesn't speak English, test them in English, and then drug them, that's not just criminal to me. That's just flat out evil. I have no other word for it. It's evil. Anyway.
No, it is. And again, that brings, and I don't want to keep coming back to my book, but that's really why I wrote it.
You can keep coming back to your book. That's what we're talking about today. Because
enough is enough.
Yeah.
And it is, because like, what if I would have left my son in school? I cannot imagine.
Yeah.
And when I remember sitting with him, doing homework with him, and he is just like drudgery. He wants to play.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, we only have 3 more pages. Me being a good mom.
Yeah.
I was being horrible because I was playing this. I was just filtering this nonsense coming into him.
Yep.
And I had this vision. I go, this boy is going to be smoking pot by the time he's 12. He's already disconnecting from me. He's disconnecting from his day-to-day. Oh, can I take all the sheets? You're going to do laundry. Can I put the dirty sheets over the dining room table and make a tent until like kids.
Yeah.
And I was losing him then. And I'm like, I'm not going to lose him. I'm not going to lose him. And I'm not going to let I'm not going to let I'm not going to let my daughter or my 2 boys ever set foot in a school. And what's fascinating is my daughter and 2 boys never felt that they were stupid.
Yeah.
My first one was convinced. School convinced him. And that's the wrong message.
Yep.
The other thing that's harsh on this and also evil is by saying that my son is mentally handicapped. You put him in the same category of parents with children with actual disabilities.
Yep.
And I talk to these parents. I talk to parents of Down syndrome children, and they tell me of their challenges. My son could go on a sleepover on Friday night if I wanted a break. The parents of special needs kids, they don't get that break.
Yep.
There are special needs kids that aren't potty trained and will never be.
Yep.
That's how it is.
Yep.
My son's not in that category. He can learn.
Yep.
He can figure out the difference between the P and the D and the 6 and the 9. He could figure it out.
Yep.
So it's awful.
Yeah.
And we're losing so many kids. It breaks my heart.
Yep. Well, and you get them and you're supposed to fix them.
Yeah. And that's sometimes it goes really well.
Yep.
And then sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes the psychiatrist wins.
Yeah.
Again, I tell stories in my book. We had this girl, heartbreaking situation, 14. She had a sketchbook that she carried with her wherever she went. And she sketched puppies and hearts and vampires and unicorns and roses that had eyes and smile, teenage girl stuff. The mother told the therapist that all her daughter wanted to do was draw. And this is an obsession. This isn't healthy. So the therapist referred her to a psychiatrist, and the therapist comes to my school with the paperwork. Oh, the psychiatrist found she's got obsessive compulsive disorder. So she was placed on Zoloft to cure her. I'm like, to cure her of what, Art? I'm like, and the therapist got mad at me. She goes, well, what would you do? I go, what I would do if my child was drawing all day is I'd get them art lessons.
Yes.
That's what I would do. Because I think Michelangelo probably painted since he could hold a paintbrush. I know one of my children, a teenager, is an aspiring rock and roller, and he plays drums from the minute he gets home till 7:30 when the neighbors will start complaining. He is banging it out. And I have learned to cook through it. I can nap through it. I can do whatever. I appreciate. But what's my son doing? I know where he is. He is working on perfecting the beat or the song or whatever he's doing. He's banging away. What was this girl doing? Drawing. You could have got her a really nice set of markers and a sketchbook that was twice the size, and you could have made her day. But instead, we drug her. And then they took her out of my school.
Well, because you called him on it.
Because I called him on it.
Yep.
And she did a Christmas play. And she was the master of ceremonies for a Christmas play. And was phenomenal. She would come out and this was her own create. She's like, and now I'm going to introduce the second graders with their rendition of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. And she would do it, but she would be dressed as a pirate. And then the next time she would come out, she'd be dressed as something else, Big Bird, and she had all of these things, and she was kind of quirky and kind of awkward. And it looked like she did that on purpose. And she got a standing ovation. I'm like, this girl has talent.
Yep.
This you cannot measure with a math test.
Yep.
This we cannot regulate because she has so much more light, brightness than the kids that don't struggle in math, reading, writing, and math, right? So after the drugs, she stopped wanting to perform. She stopped writing poems. She stopped writing stories. She stopped drawing. She stopped carrying in class. And the therapist came, it's like, well, she's well adjusted. We're going to put her back in public school. And I'm like, oh my God. They're murdering this child.
Yep.
They're murdering her. Anyway, it's
wow.
No, it's tough.
It is. It is.
Yeah. And like you say, it's evil.
It is evil. I'm sorry. There's just no other excuse for it. And if a parent maybe doesn't understand or isn't educated, I might grant them a little bit of leniency, and as long as they then can see what's happening with their child and fix it. Yeah. And if not, it's just wrong. It's wrong. Yep.
Yes.
Okay, so your book, Enough is Enough. I'm assuming it is available on Amazon?
It's available on Amazon right now. It launched last Wednesday, and its first day, it made top 10 in one of the categories.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah. Well, I will put up the link in the show notes as to how to get the book, and I will also put up a copy of the cover. I have to tell you, Barbie, as I said, I researched this one time and got so upset when I saw how many drugs this woman's son was on that I never looked at it again. Mm-hmm. You, on the other hand, are confronting what I consider this evil in the education system. And you wrote a book. I know you talk on talk shows and you get out there and you do interviews, and I cannot thank you enough or validate you enough. Sorry. For confronting this evil.
Joni, I would have lost my son. And I don't consider myself special or whatever, but don't mess with my kid. Even if he was handicapped. Like even if he was, all the people around him are going to think he's brilliant because he is.
Yep.
A drug is not going to handle that.
Nope.
Right? And I'm not anti-drug. I've had open heart surgery as a baby. My life has been saved from the medical industry.
Yep.
But I see too many children being ruined because we're not solving the problem that needs to be solved.
Well, that's unnecessary drugging, okay?
Yes, it is. It is unnecessary.
I broke my arm in 2 places. Yeah, I took painkillers for a day and a half and then switched to aspirin if I needed it. But this is unnecessary, unresearched, unqualified, unverified drugging of children. And we as grown-ups are making that decision. And that is just wrong. I mean, I'm sorry. If you're listening and you've put your kids on these drugs, do something about it now. And
well, you have to ask questions. And again, I tell lots of stories here because I don't want to. I want you to come to your conclusion.
Right.
Right. I want you to come to your conclusion. It was 2006, 2007 in that area that on Miami Beach at the Omni Hotel was the annual Youth Psychiatric Convention. And I'm kind of a wild person. So I got a friend of mine. I'm like, let's go. Let's go. And let's see. I want to ask questions because I don't want to be championing something that I don't know about. So I went under the pretense that I was on an internship, a CNN internship, and I needed to do a lot of video. Now, this is before phones and everything, so you had to have a camera, blah, blah, blah. And I went purposely. I mean, my hair was longer and I was younger and all this other stuff. And my friend had the camera. It would be like if you and I went. I go, this is my aunt. We're on vacation and I'm applying for a job at CNN, but I need to show my skill as an interviewer. I'm not going to be on camera. Do you mind being on camera? And I go, I've interviewed brides and grooms. It wasn't true. I didn't interview any of them. I was there for the psychiatrist on their breaks. I interviewed about 6 and one for one. And I didn't get upset because I don't want to, that wasn't why I was there, was to create a scene. I didn't, but I'm like, so what is this chemical imbalance? Like, I know that if you're hyperthyroid or hypothyroid, it's 2 different handlings, 2 different medications. So what's the chemical, and do I have too much of it or too little? What's the test? There is no test. There is no test for ADHD. None exists. No CAT scan, nothing. I'm like, okay, so how can you tell if I have too much of a chemical or not enough of a chemical if you can't name the chemical? Like, how are we doing this? Well, right now, psychiatry is not a science and we do a lot of guesswork. Like, okay, so how can a child that's 4 be labeled ADHD? Well, if the mother and father weren't good in school, that will be inherited by the child. I'm like, but let me check on this. Let me just stop that. How do you explain then that 2 of my children are gifted musicians and singers, and I can't sing Happy Birthday without the neighbors calling the cops because it's just so awful? You know, I'm like, I have 0 music. I go, I don't know that gets inherited. Anyway, it was just like, I'm like, what is this? And the psychiatrists were so into, like, one for one. They all, well, I have certificates and I did a program at Harvard and I did a this and I got my master's and my blah, 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 blah. Like, that's all they could quote was their piece of paper. But yet there is no chemical imbalance. I heard it 6 out of 6. There is no test for ADHD. I heard it 6 out of 6. And this is the youth conference for the entire United States. So I think I'm talking to the experts.
Interesting.
And then I asked this question, which I said something hilarious. I go, so how do you determine the drugs? Like, how do we know the drugs are safe? He goes, we test them on lesser animals. So I'm like, you mean there's like a raccoon walking around somewhere on ADHD? And the psychiatrist told me, he goes, well, the brain of a rat is very similar to the brain of a human. And I'm like, well, when you find a rat that can do laundry and manage 4 children and you know, all of this, I'm on board. I'm on board because I'm a single mom and I need to find that rat. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah. So is that research in your book, Barbie?
Yes.
Oh, okay,
absolutely.
good.
The point of that is ask the question.
Yes.
And when I have parents, they're like, well, I think we're going to enroll in this drug study. I'm like, that's totally up to you, but you better ask the question, who can you sue if the drug study goes bad?
Right.
And when they ask that question, they're dismissed from the drug study.
Yeah. Yep. What are the questions that a parent should ask the school when they are told that their child has ADHD or they suspect the child has ADHD or some other learning disability and should be medicated? What are the specific questions they should ask? Give me, you maybe have a bunch of them, but give me at least a couple.
Would say, I have them in my book, and off the top of my head, I'm going to try to come up with them.
Okay.
One, I would say, which drug cures ADHD? Which drug has been proven to cure ADHD?
Okay.
That's one. Two, who do I sue if you're wrong? What test?
That's a really good one.
Yes. What test is the school performing that verifies that my child has ADHD? What's the qualification? Because, the other thing is the teacher in my son's case is telling me he needs medication. I'm like, okay, no disrespect. You're a teacher. You're not a pharmacist. You're not an MD. Yep. I don't go to you for the dentist.
Yep.
And if I went to my dentist and said, hey, my son has a cavity and I think he needs to have his tooth extracted, that dentist isn't going to do anything. But yet in psychiatry, like with that girl who's got art, the mom can come in and her word is senior to the child's.
Yep.
And that's not fair. You have, again, I go into this because you have this whole practice of diagnosing off a checklist. Yep. If a child is picked last or has sloppy handwriting or is afraid of new things, those are all red flags for mental illness and learning disability. But nobody ever asked the child. They ask the teacher, oh, yes, he gets out of his seat many times a day. They ask the parents, oh, he doesn't do the chores. They never ask the child, how many times does the teacher yell at you? How much time does your parent spend reading to you every day? How many times does your parent say they love you and that life is better because you're in it?
Yep.
When you have that type of family, man, that child thrives. Yep. When you don't have that type of family and they're labeling him without his input, which I don't agree with the labeling at all.
Right.
But at least ask the kid.
Yep.
At least ask the kid. We have a boy that was high anxiety. Why? He walked in on his dad watching porn and it devastated him. He was 8 years old. 8 years old.
Yep.
And drugged.
So I would just like to make a plug again for Barbie's book. If you are listening and you know a child, I don't care whether it's your child, a friend's child, a relative's child, if you know a child, you need to read this book. It's as simple as that. And that means everybody who's listening. You got to read the book. Enough is Enough by Barbie Rivera. Barbie, once again, I promise not to get emotional. You are a rock star. You are confronting the evil, and you are fighting the good fight on behalf of parents everywhere. And yeah, okay, you can say you're not special. Okay, I'll say you're not special, but you are a rock star because you are making a difference, and that is huge. And I know that there are parents out there who are thinking twice, and who knows, maybe this lady I talked to today, maybe she had some awareness and have seen something that you've done, but she knows that she's not going to put her child on medication because it's not the solution. So thank you. And thank you for talking to us today.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for listening today. One thing I do want to say is that if you're a parent and you have had your child on these drugs, you can get them off. You can make a change. It's not the end of the world, but you need to get research. And before you put your kid on these drugs, I would recommend that you get a lot of research and ask the tough questions, like the ones that Barbie asked the psychiatrists. Once again, her book is called Enough is Enough. Her name is Barbie, just like the doll, Rivera, Rivera, on Amazon. We've got another interview coming up next week.
You have been listening to the Addiction Podcast, Point of No Return. For more information, reach out to us on Facebook or go to www.theaddictionpodcast.com. Our email is theaddictionpodcast@yahoo.com.